Welcome to a CNBC Web Extra. I'm here with Federal Reserve Governor Jay Powell, who's also head of the Federal Reserve's Bank Supervisory Committee. Jay, thanks for joining us on the Web Extra here.
Great to be here.
You have some changes that you want to make to the stress test. There's a qualitative part and a quantitative part. And do I understand correctly, you may want to make this qualitative part even just go away?
Well, we are looking at the question of whether we can move the qualitative supervision part into a regular supervisory program for some institutions that have achieved a lot of progress on that front, and have it no longer be part of passing or failing CCAR, the main stress test. That's what we're looking at. It's not a decision that we've made, but it's something that we're considering, not for this year, of course, but for next year.
So that would mean that they wouldn't have it wouldn't be a separate part of the test, and you couldn't say you reduce your dividend payment or share buybacks because you failed the qualitative.
Yeah, the idea is that we would, again, for banks that have achieved a certain level of proficiency on this qualitative, which is about, do you have the processes in place to understand your risks and plan your capital? That's really the qualitative side of it. So for banks that have really achieved pretty high level of proficiency on that, we would continue to supervise them for those issues, but it would be taken out of CCAR, so it would no longer be a grounds for failing CCAR. CCAR would still have a quantitative test that the banks would be required to pass.
There's also tension in the stress test on something else, which is this idea that the banks complain they don't have transparency on what you're testing for, and yet you don't want to give them the test or show them the model before they take it, because then you're really not figuring out whether or not there's risk in the system. How do you solve that?
That's right. It's, there's a fair point that they're entitled to pretty good clarity about what the requirement is, since it's for many of them the binding capital requirement. On the other hand, we really don't want them, and it would not be appropriate for them to have our model, because then they'd be managing their companies potentially to our model, and we really don't want that. We want them having their own models. So the answer that we're working on is to provide greater transparency. So we're going to be handing out, before the next stress testing cycle, the plan is to hand out sample portfolios that show the range of losses that our model produces for particular kinds of portfolios. And we're going to go to the public and solicit comment on how we might approach that. That's one thing we're doing. Another thing we're doing is we're going to give more clear guidance on how we approach the qualitative side of it.
Last thing, you're talking about easing the rules or the regulations that govern the boards of directors of the banks. Why is that something we need to do?
It's not so much easing them. It is so boards of directors have their main job is to hold management accountable, understand the strategy, and be a participant in setting the strategy and the tone at the top of the company. This is a really important job. If they have to instead get pulled into a lot of small things, which were really the job of management, then the job becomes too big and they don't do as well the things they need to do. They need to be thinking, there's a lot going on in the financial services industry. Think about the evolution of technology and the globalization of financial services. They need to be thinking about those trends so that and thinking about how those trends affect the business model of their company. They need the space to do that. They need the flexibility to do it. I think after the crisis, understandably, we provided quite a lot of very specific guidance that says the board shall do this, the board shall do that. I think we agree that it's better to withdraw some of that and then go with a more principles-based set of guidance and give them more flexibility to do what they need to do.
Governor Powell, thanks very much for your time on this.
Thank you, Steve.
Great.